They're not attacking us on class. They're trying to sell themselves as better on class than we are.
And this is what Vaush doesn't get.
A protest would be pretty flippin' sweet. Protest means local news coverage, maybe more than local. Hell, the conservative media machine loves taking stories like this and blowing them up to national importance.
Yeah. And you've got useful idiots like Bill Maher to boot, right? People that'll like pretend to be centrist or even left-wing that will still bring on the right-wing provocateur when what he's complaining about is like, I'm being silenced. What about free speech? So when you bring on Milo Yiannopoulos or whoever onto a college campus, right? Innuendo Studios is saying, the student body of UC Emeryville is not interested in this right-wing garbage. But if there's a protest there, if there's controversy there, then they will bring in a bunch of chuds. And the problem with this is, and the thing that people don't realize, is that when you're bringing not just a right-wing speaker, right? So that's the free speech, right? You got he's got to have his free speech to talk to an audience that's not interested in hearing his message, right? When you bring what comes with a right-wing speaker like Yiannopoulos, right-wing hate groups, militant, dangerous, violent right-wing hate groups onto a college campus, you're going to get people beat up. You're going to get marginalized people targeted, harassed. So if you want to talk about free speech and you want to say that fear and intimidation is an impediment to free speech, well, that's what you're bringing against the students, though, right? They're going to make this up like Milo Yiannopoulos is the victim. But in reality, the victims are marginalized students within that campus. You're already underrepresented. Now you've got to deal with the prospect of getting hurt, of getting targeted, of getting harassed, at the very least, of being put into a situation that is scary and that people who aren't marginalized in the same way as you can't see is scary. Go on, Innuendo Studios.
He plays his cards right. He could get his words in front of millions of people instead of just the student body of UC Emeryville. Of course, he's gonna take that gig. But the progressive students at UCE are wise to his tricks. They've seen him pull this stunt at other UCs, Stockton, Bakersfield, Vacaville. So they make the decision, we're not gonna protest. We're just gonna let him speak. Let the boy stamp his feet, and in a month, no one will even remember he was here. As the date approaches and the provocateur sees he's not getting the response he wants, he starts hinting things on social media, trying to bait a reaction. Psst. Psst, hey. I'm gonna make jokes about the Holocaust. I'm gonna say Americans treated their slaves well. Nothing. So he ups the ante. Makes it personal. I'm gonna put up pre-transition photos of your trans students. I'm gonna out the queer students I've seen on Grindr.
No, I mean, like, some of these stories are a little bit old, but this stuff really happened. This personalized targeting of individual, marginalized students. This happened.
I'm gonna name which of your students I think are illegal immigrants. Student body's like, bro, do your worst. Nobody's falling for it, until one student's like, hold up. He's gonna dox immigrants in front of his audience of white nationalist gun nuts, and we're just gonna let him? You know some of his fans were in Charlottesville, right? What we're seeing here is a game of chicken between one group of white conservative reactionaries and one group of, let's be honest, mostly white liberals, for whom the stakes are who gets paid attention to. The provocateur doesn't have the ammunition nor the optics to attack privileged liberals directly, so he pokes and prods at various social minorities whom privileged liberals are supposed to care about, until he gets a reaction. Going after people of color is a pure Xanatos gambit for his fans. Either they get a protest and a national audience hears their reactionary rhetoric, or there's no protest and they get to fuck with some immigrants. And because white liberals are largely ignorant to the threat posed, white liberals are not great at assessing the full scope of the danger. Often enough, this remains, to them, an argument about ideas and principles. To them, they are but words, until someone gets hit by a car or shot, and then it's, who could have predicted? The provocateur's animating force is not hatred of people of color. It's hatred of white liberals, just as white liberals' animating force is less advocacy for people of color than moral victory over conservatives. Neither side acknowledges people of color as entities in this fight. They're viewed as tools for getting white people what they want, and their suffering is viewed as an acceptable byproduct. You've maybe heard the phrase, in the game of patriarchy, women are not the opposing team, they are the ball. Well, in the game of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, minorities are not the opposing team. They are the cars, store windows, and newspaper kiosks that get wrecked when the home team loses, or when the home team wins. And make no mistake, weaponizing or disregarding students of color is still racism. But it's racism of a kind most white people have trouble recognizing, or, to speak with a sharper edge, that white people often refuse to acknowledge. From the white provocateur who does not hate minorities directly, but is willing to utilize the hatred of others to get what he wants from some white people, who says, I will hurt them a lot just to hurt you a little, to the white liberal who does mental gymnastics to not come out and say, that is a black and brown sacrifice I'm willing to make. Racism is not always a passion, but it is tolerable, usable, easy to disregard. In a white supremacist world, it is the cost of doing business. Let me make it clear. Nothing about this is okay. Now, the weaponizing of minority suffering is employed against many minoritized groups. I could be making this video about transphobia or homophobia, and while many details would differ, I wouldn't even have to change my intro. Samuel R. Delaney, take a shot, argues that...
Wait. Oh my god, wait. What is this, like a checklist of like things that Innuendo Studios does a lot in his videos? Okay, Innuendo Studios drinking game. Take a shot when Innuendo Studios makes it about capitalism, mentions Samuel R. Delaney, swears loudly, suddenly, misuses big words, starts a sentence with like, oh my god, that's me. That's me for real. That's literally me. Plays a show tune down their part? Wait, what does that mean? Down their part? Smash Brothers analogy. Okay.
Argues that misogyny is the oldest bigotry, and therefore the model on which all other bigotries are based. I'm focusing on institutional racism as my chief example, first, because this is America and the cup runneth over. Second, because in the 2016 election, the greatest indicator a person was going to vote Republican more strongly correlated than being registered as a Republican.
No, I really thought that we were going to say sex, that we were going to say being male. I mean, in aggregate, obviously, you know, there's men that don't support Donald Trump. And remember, trans men exist, and trans men definitely, by and large, don't support Trump, right? So, but like, I thought it was going to be about sex, but no, watch what it's actually about.
Republican was racist sentiments. And third, because racism is a fundamental building block of fascism and a primary means of sowing discord on the left.
I mean, that one I should have got.
We'll get to that. I am going to curb my reflex to make every alt-right playbook some kind of definitive statement. I do not have the last word on American racism. If you want to hear about American racism from the people who experience it, here's a book. Here's 5 books. What I bring to the table is, I have, at this point, several decades experience being white.
Oh, that's Innuendo Studios. I never really knew what he looked like.
Trying to explicate white supremacy, it is sometimes worthwhile to look at it from the inside. So my focus will be, what does whiteness mean to white people? American racial discourse has 4 principal white characters. On the far right end, you've got the guy white people picture when they hear the word racist. Your Klansman, your neo-Nazi, your Thai ethno-nationalist. This guy knows he's a racist, and he's proud of it. You've got the white collaborator. The politician, public figure, or businessman who does not agree with the white supremacist on paper, but will seek out their votes, attention, or money.
Was that Davis Irene?
Next to the collaborator,
that was Davis Irene, wasn't it?
Moderate. People who ostensibly believe in racial justice as an end goal and are somewhat committed to bringing it about, but only with the cooperation of the white collaborator. It wouldn't be fair to do it without their consent, you see, and thus the white moderate spends a lot less time opposing collaborators than appealing.
So wait, the white moderate, that's Bill Maher, right? I don't know. I feel like Bill Maher, at this point, I would say white moderate, but he's like on his path towards white collaborator, right? Bill Maher is in transit. Bill Maher is in flux.
To their better natures.
He's making so much money appealing to the right wing.
They tend to operate on behalf of people of color rather than...
He is a collaborator?
...with them. Plainly put, the cost of doing business maneuver is this group using this group to attack this...
Do you think he started, though, as a white moderate?
...group using people of color as their weapon of choice. It is white supremacy in the
conservative
form of 3 groups of white people fighting amongst themselves. Finally, on the far opposite end, you have the honest-to-goodness anti-racist. where the racist will support white supremacy.
Okay, so that's Richard Spencer.
The collaborator uphold white supremacy, and the moderate seek to reform white supremacy.
I mean, these could just be random white dudes.
Only the anti-racist is trying to get rid of it. And even they are not free from racial bias.
To boomers, Bill will always be left or liberal. Yeah, because they remember him from his old stuff, right?
And if you...
Wasn't he big into atheism? Didn't he do like an atheist movie?
Tell one of them, you are not free from racial bias. It's not guaranteed they will react well. It's just, if you're trying to...
Okay, so now this is important. Even people who are oriented towards anti-racism are still going to have some whiteness to unpack, to dismantle, to examine. I think that a long time ago, Vera Speaks and I came up with a metaphor, and it was Agent Smith. And the idea was this, that like, just like in the Matrix, Agent Smith could like come out of anybody. If Agent Smith is like racism, is like, you know, anti-black racism or, you know, just basically white nonsense, right? That Agent Smith can come out of any white person. That offers some important understanding for what non-white comrades are dealing with us, right? Is that any one of us at any time could like pop off with some fragility. It could happen, right? Hopefully we're working towards dismantling that, but it's a long process and there's a lot to dismantle, as Innuendo Studios is about to get into. And I haven't heard as good of a discussion of whiteness, right? Which is a weird thing, because we're going to talk about how whiteness is invisible, how it never gets talked about, how people are unaware of it even being there. But this is a really good discussion of whiteness.
White supremacy, they're the white folks you have the best odds with. Now, this little chorus line is not how white people typically frame the situation. We usually think of racism as a binary. There are racists, and there are non-racists. In that framing, the provocateur is someone whose allegiance we get to debate. He willingly sacrifices people of color, but without personally hating them. Does that count as #racism? This debate lasts approximately the rest of your goddamn life, which should be evidence enough that the...
Again, this is what's annoying, is that, like, you know, throughout the 20th century, Americans rejected racism, but... asterisk, rejected a certain part of racism, rejected a certain kind of racism, rejected racism in a stereotypical setting. And that setting is Klansmen, skinhead. These people we don't like. These people we've rejected. These people turn the majority of Americans off. But if you take that racism, that same bull, and you put it in a different package, you get a different reaction. Because what Americans have really rejected is that stereotype of racism rather than racism itself. And we're going to get into further how a lot of us don't really know racism. We limit what we view as racism to a very small spectrum, when in actuality, there's an invisible part of the racist spectrum that's just kind of sliding by. And that's what Richard Spencer and company exploit.
Frame is wanting. In today's framing, there are several shades of racism, and there is anti-racism. There is no non. Now, before we map the choreography...
So what does that mean? There is no non. So what that means is you can't be neutral. You can't just be like, look, I don't think about race, I'm past race, I'm post-racial. That's bullshit. That is racist, right? So that's what Innuendo Studios is saying there.
4 types interact. First, a quick note on how most white people think about whiteness. Short answer, whenever possible, they prefer not to.
Whiteness in America. Is it vanilla? No. It's fior di latte.
Meow.
Nothing but milk and sugar. When non-whites are flavors, we are the base. In the same way one does not hear one's own accent.
Milk and sugar.
British people have accents.
That's not a lot of pots.
But we just speak English normal-like.
That's not a lot of pots.
If you have not built your whole identity around being white, you probably don't think about your whiteness very often, and perhaps even feel uncomfortable when one points it out. For it is the white experience to passively, unconsciously, conceive of oneself as a kind of raceless default. This is privilege. Indeed, this is part of what makes...
Okay, so this is the default person. This is what Innuendo Studios is going to call the everyman. This is the essence of privilege, yeah.
Privilege. It's the identity that's treated as a norm, the one you don't have to think about. A movie with an all-white cast is widely perceived as being in no way about race. But that's not true of one with an all-black cast. Identity is being treated as...
This ties into something Innuendo Studios said earlier about, there are 2 sexes. There is male and political. There are two races. There is white and political, right? What gets politicized is that which is not the default. If you're watching me on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment. I do answer those, and sometimes I answer them in a sassy way.
Defaults makes institutional racism difficult to understand even for well-meaning white people. How can I be racist if I don't identify as a racist? How could I be part of a group I never opted into? But let us reflect. Would a group one never opted into not describe a minority? People don't choose to be gay, and while people also don't choose to be straight, being straight is normal. People don't come out as straight or have complex codes for signaling heterosexuality. Not that they'll admit to, at least. In lieu of other evidence, straightness is presumed. But if people clock you as gay, or even think they've clocked you as gay, then you stand out from the background. It makes you more visible, where the appearance of straightness makes you less so. Makes you the everyman. Of the many identities one may have at any given time on any given axis, there is typically only one default, whose rules operate differently to the rest. The more of these normal identities one possesses, the more accustomed one is to being the default. The idea is foreign that people might group one not by how one thinks of oneself, but by how one is perceived, and by how one impacts others. It gets hard to fathom that any more than whether or not a light-skinned Mexican gets to be white is up to them, whether or not you fit the definition of racist is not up to you. The boundaries are not policed from the inside.
So, okay, going again from right to left, this is where we find the titular alt-right. What's novel about the suit and tie ethno-nationalist is how they break from the iconography of racism. Their goal, like that of many racist people, is to attack and oppress people of color, but in such a way that the white establishment lets them get away with it. The average white person's shorthand for a racist is still primarily the Klansman and the neo-Nazi.
Yeah.
Respectively, a rural working-class white nationalism and an urban working-class white nationalism. The alt-right is the gentrification of white nationalism. Their pocket squares and MBAs and $90 haircuts short out the white moderate's brain because they still associate white supremacy with white trash. Racism is worse.
So now that's really important, okay?
Than evil. It's common. It's why they insist reactionary conservatism is propped up by the white working...
So do you see what we're saying? Like, there was a rejection of racism in the 20th century, but it was only within the context of a lower class. Whereas racism, when it occurs in an upper class, is not seen, is invisible, slips right through the cracks, right?
Class in flyover states, despite all evidence to the contrary. The alt-right can't be as bad as everyone said.
Oh, yeah. No, this is important. Yeah, look at that. Median household income. Right. So the media told you that the reason that Trump voters were voting for Trump was because they are, lower class, working class white voters. Right. And it's just not true. It's just not true. They are more likely to be jet ski dealers or something like that, to own a small business. And in reality, when you're talking about the actual working class, a lot of these people don't vote. A lot of these people can't get time off of work to vote, right? A lot of these people feel turned off by the whole political apparatus. So you've got a right wing that pretends to be working class, that sees it. Look at the way that Trump wears that hat, right? He's not a billionaire, probably. Like he lies about it. He inflates his ego and his wealth, right? But he is a rich man. And he tries to pretend not to be. All the stuff that he does, eating McDonald's, that is to try to be try to pretend to be the working class. But this is a lie. Look at this. People who can afford to take time off from work, buy a plane ticket, fly to Washington, D.C., stay in a hotel there, and then try to overturn the results of an election. Those aren't poor people.
Because who ever heard of a racist going to Harvard?
The alt-right bridges the gap between white nationalism and the rest of white culture using class signifiers to gain access to the political and social capital of the more mainstream collaborator, and getting the moderate to treat them not as someone to be ignored, but someone to bargain with in good faith. The collaborator finds value in this relationship because, regardless of one's position on it, racism works. A police officer may not be personally racist, but when it's the end of the month and they need to hand out a few more tickets to make quota, it's safest to do so in a low-income neighborhood where the average driver can't make their life hell by hiring a lawyer. And due to decades of racist redlining, most low-income neighborhoods are disproportionately black and Latine, so... And a prison warden may not be personally racist, but White people are approved by jury selection more often than people who think the justice system itself is racist, so Black and Latina people are the easiest to jail, and private...
So racism works. That sounds really weird, but it's like what's meant by that is this. The kind of racism that often isn't called out as racism, that kind of racism is the path of least resistance, right? For the people that were mentioned.
Prisons get more funding when they're full, so... And a conservative politician may not be personally racist, but Black and Latina people...
Yeah. So that whole median income thing means at least half of the Trump voters are earning more than $72K a year. God, I'd be happy to have $72K a year.
Predominantly vote Democrat, and since they're disproportionately imprisoned, if the politician denies convicts the right to vote, they're more likely to get reelected, so...
I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby has anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks they give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to.
What James Baldwin's really talking about there is the difference between intent and impact. The person will swear up and down, this is not their intent, they're not trying to be racist, but what's the impact? What's really happening, right? And that's undeniable.
Now, frequently enough, these people are self-identified, card-carrying racists. My point is, for this system of incentives and rewards to operate, they don't have to be. Any of them may, but none of them must. Racism exists, and it's efficient. And in a capitalist society where cops are
And like, take an institution like the police, right? You're going to have a lot of racists there. There's going to be a lot of people that really recognize themselves as racist. And they might not admit it, but they know that's how they feel. And then you're going to have other people that don't openly identify as that, but they do have the casual racism. They do have the unconscious racism, right? The normie racism, if you will. And they are in that institution with all those other racist cops. What do you think the flow that you go along with is in that institution? When you have an institution which was literally formed out of slave patrols and Pinkerton anti-union thugs, what kind of institution do you think you have? What do you think that the culture of that institution is?
Competing for promotions, private prisons are competing for contracts, and politicians are competing for votes. If an unethical behavior sees a higher return than the alternative, then ethics are a luxury. There are hundreds of examples of businesses that claim, in periods of prosperity, that they prefer to do what is right over what is profitable. But what do they say when prosperity ends? Every boom has a bust. Since 1900, the US has spent 1 out of every 4 years in recession. And in the lean season, not using generations-old system built by white people to advantage their descendants is a liability. A values-based business typically goes one of 3 ways: compromising their values to stay competitive, getting bought by someone who compromised their values to stay competitive, or sticking to their guns and facing a higher risk of going out of business. Many choose to do the right thing, and some even survive. But that's beating the odds. The market trends towards the optimal strategy. No one ever went broke appealing to the ignorance of white people. We agree with the aim of closing the racial wealth gap, just not like this. We agree with the aim of Latin Americans entering the country, just not like this.
What is that movie? What is that? That's a reference to a movie. Oh my God, it's The Matrix. Oh, fuck.
We agree with the aim of peaceful protest, just not like this. And if we on the left are to ask, how exactly are we supposed to get this without this? Oh, coming up with that solution? That's our job. And if it's not getting done, it's because we haven't come up with a solution they like yet. And probably what they don't like about our solutions is that we implied the problem was racism. Yes, white people are overrepresented in dozens of industries nationwide, but have you
So they want to take care of a problem without admitting that the problem exists. Sounds like a bit of a impossible situation to me.
Considered. So, okay, when a Democrat loses an election, what happens with the white liberal pundit class? Well, there's suddenly a lot of chatter about how to talk to your racist uncle over Thanksgiving, about how liberals in red states can contact their representatives, about the value of debate. This is our fault, they say. We let this happen because we didn't have enough conversations with white conservatives. You hear a lot more of that.
Who does that sound like? Who does that sound like on Twitch? This is literally the argument that you're going to get from Stardust or anybody else in that network, right? Stardust doesn't like the Groypers, but if we don't talk to them, then they're just going to get worse and worse. So really, who's the real anti-racist, me or Stardust? Stardust would say it's her. And she's absolutely full of shit. But that bull walks on Twitch politics, unfortunately, right? That's the common perception, right? You got to have a conversation with the far right.
Talk then about how the gutting of the Voting Rights Act cost a lot of the left the right to vote, and what could be done to guarantee their representation in the next election. If hurting black people isn't their goal and they're just trying to win elections, is that really racist? Moderates are very cagey about breaking out the R word for a fellow white.
Generally what they'll do is they'll tell themselves some lies about illegal voting and they'll justify it with that.
White person. See, there's this other definition of racism that most white people learn in grade school. Racism is when you say mean things to other kids about skin color and it hurts their feelings. Racism is about cruelty, and harm done by white people, therefore, is not racism if it isn't cruel, if it's merely ignorant or apathetic. But ignorance and apathy can be reasoned with. You just gotta sit down and hash it out, as long as it takes. Real white supremacy.
Innuendo Studios is saying cruelty here. I almost think it's like about civility. It'll get codified into like a discussion of manners, that racism is just a form of ill manners. And what do manners connect to? That's right, class. That's the inability to see racism outside of class dynamics, only seeing racism as it manifests in the lower class. And stereotyping the lower class as being, working class really, as being inherently racist, and stereotyping the upper class as being post-racial, like not racist, right? That's that whole myth of the neutral alignment as being the enlightened one.
Is about emotional distress, or it's uncommon, it's unpopular, and it's a hearts and minds issue. What this definition leaves out is any notion that white supremacy is about power. That white people who disavow racism still live longer, get paid better, get arrested less often, and are typically in position to negotiate with whomever's in power. That this society was built for the everyman, and being the everyman confers power upon you. When children of white moderates get older and first brush up against this definition, wherein white supremacy is not small, but all-encompassing, where it can be cruel, but is at least as often indifferent, and where every white person in the country is bound up in it and privileged by it, whether they want to be or not, and will never, ever experience it themselves, where it's not about feelings, but about power. How often do they say, oh, maybe the definition I grew up...
And this is what Vaush doesn't get. This is what Vaush fans are missing in their analysis. What non-compete called objective power relations, right? They want to see racism as being animosity based on race. And therefore, the black person that has animosity towards white people is just as bad as you know, the other way around. Never mind the fact that, you know, you got one person who has like no power, and you got another person, the very implicit bias that they hold is oppressing the person with no power, right? So they're ignoring power relations, and therefore their analysis is faulty, right?
Up with was simplified for 9-year-olds. Or, oh, maybe the definition given to me by white grown-ups was less complete than one a black grown-up might have given. And how often do they say, you can't just redefine racism? Right out the gate, the white moderate is possessive not just of their whiteness, but of the very definition of racism. In the definition they know, racism exists only over here. And the white collaborator is a compatriot who shares their ultimate vision for the future and has simply gone off course somewhere. And they don't see themselves as flawed individuals with a long way still to go. They've already arrived. They're the destination everyone else needs to get to.
Seeing the post-racial as being the enlightened position.
Proof that white supremacy can be easily and painlessly opted out of.
And it's also kind of a viewpoint that if you ignore it, it'll go away. That this person over on the left, the anti-racist, is the one who's provoking the collaborator and the button-down ethno-nationalist. I mean, you've heard this argument too, right? Blaming the left for the existence of racists, right? Seeing the reaction of the people on the right as the fault of the anti-racist person on the left.
They can't see collaborators
Buffy.
as opponents because there is no definition of white supremacy that includes collaborators and doesn't also include them. And this is critically important. They don't want to start thinking of themselves as white. They don't want the constant awareness of one's race and how one's race is perceived. You know, the things the rest of humanity deals with. And who would want that? I'll tell you who wants that. Nazis and Klansmen want that. They're the only ones who like thinking about whiteness every day. So white moderates cling to the other definition, the comfortable one. How about instead of defunding the police, we give them more money than any administration in years, but also Juneteenth is a national holiday now. Something for everyone. The left has the numbers to leave behind white centrists who slow down anti-racist efforts. And it doesn't, because white moderates don't want to. They and the white collaborators are supposed to be in this together. And they are. Just not in the way they think. The irony is that the right feels no affinity for white moderates whatsoever. They hate, and I mean hate, white moderates. Smug pricks always talking about unity whenever they win an election. Reach across the aisle? That's what you say when you've lost and you want the other guys to make concessions they don't have to make. You don't do it when you're in power. Are they trying to humiliate us, or did we really lose to a bunch of clowns who don't even know how to win right? Debasing themselves in front of minorities just to get their votes when they clearly aren't going to do anything real for them? Christ, at least the white supremacists are honest. The right will threaten POC sometimes just to call the white moderates bluff. Racism must be understood as more than a set of individual beliefs and feelings, but as a tool for achieving political ends. First and foremost, because claiming otherwise is both
Okay, now here's what I saw, and this is symbolic. For a second, it looked like a hammer and sickle, but it's clearly a hammer and a pick. Like, it's a Minecraft. It's a diamond. There are no hammers in Minecraft. It's not Minecraft.
And morally wrong, but also without this understanding, white culture can't recognize the stakes. Fascism begins by stealing targets from the left. They focus on elites, corrupt businessmen, weak-willed politicians, subtly shifting focus away from leftist critique of systems to types of people. This is why the far right has gone all in on transphobia, by the way. Like, it's joined Islamophobia on the outer rim of acceptable bigotries. On some level, they know trans folks aren't just cis people in disguise, that desistance is rare and conversion therapy doesn't work, because if trans people could just stop being trans, they never would have picked them for an enemy. This is where it starts. This is why you should have no patience for anyone saying wokeness is dividing the left. We should be focusing on class. They're not attacking us on class. They're trying to sell themselves as better on class than we are. Where do you think that fairy tale about blue-collar whites comes from? They want you to believe that they, and not the socialists, are the path forward for the downtrodden. There's a reason fascism started popping up all over Europe right after the Russian Revolution. Mussolini got his start beating up socialists in the Po Valley on the grounds that he was defending not wealthy elites, but struggling rural farmers who didn't like the socialist takeover of their industry during the Biennio Rosso. The fascist goal is to harness and redirect class resentment towards a scapegoat.
Yeah, let's
they
get that.
come at us on identity. It always comes down to the shape of the human skull. When a provocateur shows up on a college campus to talk about ideas, it's not a debate. There's no special sequence of words that will defeat them.
Yeah, politics.
This
yes,
is
yes,
a show
yes.
of dominance.
Thank you, Buffy. That's
They are
smart.
presenting themselves as white compatriots to be reasoned with, rather than agents of white supremacy to be opposed. In that framing, the stakes are attention, the weapons are words, and people of color are not players but tokens on a white person's game board. And they are checking whether you will submit to that structure. They don't care about ideas. They care about power. And power is what beats them. They tell you 400 people showing up to protest is just free news coverage. But when 4,000 show up, they cancel. That's power. And in absolute numbers, most events, they can't rustle up 4,000 supporters. But we can.
So what is that power, right? Because we talk about dominance paradigm a lot. We talk about dominance paradigm as being not the aesthetic, not the kernel that we want to go with. We don't want to center our movements around dominance paradigm, right? So what do we center it around to get that power, to bring 4,000 people rather than 400 people? What is the difference there? When 400 people come, it's because there's 400 people with an interest. And that's great. That's great that, there's 400 people that take an interest in what's happening to a marginalized group. But when 4,000 people show up, yes, power of the people, that's solidarity. That's what we should be building our movement around.
provided cishet non-disabled white dude lefties like myself haven't told all the right's biggest targets that their struggles don't matter. And it's worth mentioning, cops fuck with protesters less when
And it's the difference between an interest and a passion, right? It's fundamentally different.
some of them are white. It's also worth mentioning racism affects 58% of the working poor, so there can be no class solidarity that doesn't address it. This isn't who needs to win. This is who needs to win. And if you're white, you need to be over here. I've collected as many resources as I can find by POC on what they need and want from white allies and put them in the down there part. There's a plurality of opinions on this, so I recommend reading more than one, and it may not always be a 4,000 strong protest. Every direct action is unique and must be strategized in concert with the people most affected. But what I can tell you is when business gets done, white folks need to split the check. A movement cannot be...
I mean, chat, we always talk about the debate bros, and like a lot of us feel really powerless against them. Like I said, I'm talking to friends right now who are getting harassed by these people and who just want to be left alone, right? And you know, what I want to ask you to think about is what happens when 4,000 people show up to a stream like this, and Vaush has only got 2.6 thousand, right? That's power. That's solidarity. That's what winning looks like. And as much as it might feel like it's impossible, as much as it might feel like there's more of them than there are of us, there aren't. There are more of us than there are of them. We are the left. We are the actual left, right? Theirs is just a weird online niche. How do we get those 4,000 people in this chat? Solidarity. You can't just reach out on the basis of an interest, right? And like I said, nothing wrong with interest. Like an interest is better than disinterest, right? But it's got to be more than interest. It's got to touch your heart. And that's what I'm trying to get through, with terms like speaking through the silence, right? Because silence, in a lot of ways, is violence. And it's a actually terrifying type of violence when you're surrounded by that. When you're surrounded by people who should be helping, who should be on board, but who turn their back on you. I think we could do better. It's my Patreon. I would like to thank all of my Patreons. Ooh, they are objectively better people than either you or I. Unless they are you, in which case, ooh. They get to view the videos before you, so they've already seen this and hit like and left a comment and joined and became a member and all sorts of other cool stuff. They hit the bell for notifications. If you'd like to join them in the land of tomorrow, watching videos early and all, you can sign up for my Patreon too. The link is in the description, ooh. Zerazerex, Peachy Cleodna, Jackie, Gumpus Clump, Impact Suspect, Patreons. Besties!